I'm just going to talk about a couple of events that are going on here in the month of July. On July 17th at 12, we're doing a Porch Chat. The title of that program is The Diminutive Engine Wheezed Along. On July 22nd at 1 p.m. we do have Grant Remembrance Day. We have a big program. It's a lovely day. And on July 31st at 12 o'clock we have a Porch Chat entitled Widows, Weepers, and Wakes. So at this time I was going to, disappeared. I was going to, there we go. I want to welcome, I want everyone to give a hand, a round of applause for our performer today. His name is Tom Smith. Yep. He is one of our local tour guides here, and he's been doing this for 5 years, tours anyway, and you just give him a round of applause and welcome Tom.
Isn't this nice? Welcome everybody. Just give me a moment here. Not quite as bad as the bagpipes, but the weather really affects banjos a lot, so let me just do a final tune here before I completely embarrass myself, all right? This, of course, is Grant's Cottage, quite a famous place in its own right, a shrine in many ways, in testimony to General and President Grant, who, of course, died here in 1885. That's 128 years ago. So, we have quite a reason to be here. What I want to do is I want to talk about today, my presentation is basically music in Grant's time. Grant lived from 1822 until, as I say, 1885. So that's a span of about 63 years. When Grant was born, the country was 46 years old. Is there anyone here older than 46 years old? Yeah, so no. Tom's saying no. So you know, we get a sense of the newness of the nation when Grant was living. What I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about music in general during the 19th century. Give you some examples, cite some examples, play some examples, maybe sing some examples, and we'll talk about some of the songs that were very, very popular in the middle of 2 centuries ago now. The other thing I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is the banjo. Banjo is a very plain instrument. It's a very interesting instrument. It's said to be the original American instrument. What I tried to do with this banjo here, this particular one is about 1900 somewhere. It's not a vintage minstrel banjo per se, but it is an original calfskin cap and stuff head. And what I've done for this performance, I've been trying to prepare for you nice people, is I've strung this with essentially what is nylon strings, like for a classical guitar, and it imparts a different sound than what we're accustomed to with the contemporary bluegrass music, or some other type of popular music. It doesn't have that metallic sound. It doesn't have that penetrating sound that comes out of the modern bluegrass banjos and whatnot. So along with that goes some talk. I don't have to tell this group, not to pander to you, 1800 is a very, very different time from when we live in. Now we can go say, yeah, Tom's right, and that's it. But think when you go home tonight, you go in your house, everything in that house would not have existed probably, unless you have some candles. You're driving here today, well, you would have walked. You would have come on a horse. You would have rode in a cart. Someone is playing music. It wasn't a 35-peak orchestra. They didn't have laser light shows. They didn't have amplification, 18 million power amplifiers and speakers as big as this building. It was an instrument, this, or a fiddle, or a mandolin, or maybe just someone's voice. So, it was a much simpler, quieter time. As a result, we may have to pay a little bit more attention to hear this here today, although I'm very excited to try it out in this venue, because the acoustics within these wooden porches is really quite nice. So I'm hoping that it carries. So I'll just play for you a short sound so you can hear a different of a sound. Can you hear this? So that's what we're going to be listening to today. We're not going to be hearing this bluegrassy sound. We're not going to be hearing any Earl Scruggs music. Although I could play a little bit of it, but probably wouldn't sound too good on this instrument and these clothing maybe. So, we're going to talk about the banjo a little bit. Grant was a great man. He was a son, he was a father, he was a brother, he was a grandfather, he was a president, and he was a general of the United States. And he was also an author, a very fine author. And during his time period, there was a very critical stage of development of music in our culture. Music is interesting. It goes back to all our basic ancient societies. It's really kind of primal in a way. It's said that the embryo inside of the mother hears that constant, perpetual, rhythmic beat of her heart, hears her voice speaking. So voice and music kind of go hand in hand with human society, unlike other animals on the planet. I'm not playing a minstrel banjo. That's a different type of banjo a little bit, maybe down the road, who knows, one day. But this is basically a fretted banjo. There were no frets on it at the time in the early 1800s. 1860s, during the Civil War, essentially frets started to come out on the instrument, giving it a little bit more fine tuning. And then metal strings actually started to evolve at the end of the 1800s, which basically gave it more volume as groups started to present themselves to larger and larger audiences. Excuse me 1 second. Bad habit. Okay. The minstrel shows themselves are a big part of American culture. We don't always like to talk about it because we think of the degradation of the Negroes and all that. I'm not here to deny that at all. But there was a larger part of the minstrel shows that were the comedy acts, there were solos, there was circus acts, there was lots going on. And of course we did have what we know as the typical minstrel presentation, usually 4 men with a banjo, in blackface of course, with a banjo, a violin, what they call bones, which are ribs, side ribs of an animal, and a tambourine, Mr. Tambo. So those 4 fellows were the sort of the main focal point of the big musical part that drew the minstrel music. And that was prevalent in the 19th century, basically from the 1830s going up into the 1870s, when the heyday was about 1848. Walk a little closer here to you nice people. Minstrel music was essentially the pop music of the day. It was AC/DC, Barry Manilow, the Beatles, all rolled into one. It was what people listened to. And again, going back to my earlier comments, if you consider, there was nothing. So to have 1 or 2 people play 1 or 2 instruments at a gathering of 1 or 2 people was a big deal. It was very, very popular form of entertainment. And in turn, the minstrel program, the minstrel shows morphed into what we now or recall as the vaudeville shows. One thing before we get going here on a little bit of the meat and potatoes here, please, is there are many, many changes since the 1800s, as we've already said. One of them, 2 points I'd like to talk about. We talked about the simplicity of life, basically much quieter, simpler, slower. I figure when the sun went down, it was dark and quiet. People sat, they entertained themselves, they talked, they did their knitting, they might have played some music, someone played for them. It was a very simple time of life. 2 other things stick out that I'd like to talk about. One is our language. Our language is constantly going through change. We know that in contemporary society, with the internet and everything else that grand operation has brought us, okay? But there were certain words that we hear in the 1800 songs that have just changed. So I'd just like to address 1 or 2 of them really right now, actually mainly one, and that's the word gay. Okay, we hear this. Certainly the word gay did not have the connotation in 1843 that it has in the year 2013. So, as we do some of these songs, we're realizing that people are happy and they're elated and they're feeling wonderful. It's not the connotation that we carry with us today, as we know. So, deck the halls with boughs of holly and your, gay, don we now gay apparel had a much different meaning, of course. Johnny Comes Marching Home Again. We'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. well, we could talk about that for a little bit too, right? So sometimes the words change. Another big aspect of the language is the Negro dialect. It was formally placed into the copyrights and publications and presentations of the minstrel shows. I will not be doing any of that today, so don't be concerned about that. But I wanted you to know that it was a big part of the music, and as a result, some of the contemporary renditions and stuff have kind of toned down that language, which is really a good thing. So with that, let's move along to a couple of songs that you may know. I hope some of us know. I'm getting some sort of guess that there are some people in this group that are mature enough to have remembered some of these. So let's see if I can stimulate some of these gray cells that we have. Okay, Buffalo Gals was a song that was written in 1844 by a fellow named John Cool White Hodges. That sounds like a rapper today. In 1844, Grant was in Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, having recently graduated from West Point, and he was also engaged in the month of June to his dear Julia. Buffalo Gals was an interesting song. It basically took on the aspect of wherever the song was being played. Saratoga Gals, Boston Gals, New York Gals. It landed on Buffalo Gals. It was probably Utica Gals and Canachahary Gals and who knows. Okay, but it did last. Okay, so let's start with some of the music and see if you recognize some of this. I hope some of us remember that one.
Only because my great-grandfather must have told me.
Can you folks hear me back there?
Yes.
Can you hear this thing back there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, the next one I want to do is a song in 1846. This was written by Daniel Decatur Emmett, one of the big composers of the time. It went by different names. It was originally called Blue Tail Fly. It was also renamed the Jimmy Crack Corn or Jim Crack Corn. But anyway, let's try this a little bit and see what this sounds like. Passed down his jug when he got dry, and brushed away the blue-tail fly. Jimmy Crack Corn, I don't care. Jimmy Crack Corn, I don't care. Jimmy Crack Corn, I don't care. My master's gone away. Epitaph is there to see. Beneath this stone I'm forced to lie, a victim of the blue-tail fly. Jimmy Crack Corn and I don't care. Jimmy Crack Corn and I don't care. Jimmy Crack Corn and I don't care. My master's gone So moving along, the next period I want to really talk about of music in Grant's life was Stephen Foster. Stephen Foster was an enormous influence in American music during the 19th century. He led, frankly, a rather tragic life. He only lived till about 38 years old. He was born in 1826 on July 4th. Does that mean anything to any of our historians here, that date? Huh? Well, it was also the date that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died. So they were on the 50th anniversary of our nation. So Stephen Foster was born in Pittsburgh, one 10 of 11 children, and died in New York City at the age of 64. Frankly, he was apparently a devout alcoholic and died 3 days after attempting to take his own life. He was a prolific songwriter, wrote over 200 songs. One thing I have to tell you about the time period was it was much different than today. A songwriter didn't write a song and present it to a producer who made a CD and put it out on the internet and you went and bought it. Or, you know, you put in a record and you went to a music store and you listened to the record you liked on the radio and you bought the record. It wasn't like that. They made their money through the publication of music, sheet music, so that people would buy sheet music and go home to their homes and play those songs. As a result, there was a lot of very foul deeds going on. In fact, one of the songs here, I haven't come across my notes here, but Stephen Foster sold the rights to it for $5. And I think it was Oh Susanna. And as we know, well, I might be wrong on that, but anyway, as we know, there were these, you know, the unscrupulous publishers. What would happen, the minstrel company would come to Foster, because he was one of the better ones, and says, geez, write a song for Saturday night, we need something. So he'd write this song, the minstrels would play it, and the leader of the minstrels would take that melody, write it out, and go publish it. So there were scoundrels all the time going on here. So anyway, Stephen Foster was around for about almost 40 years. Very influential in his music. He was a pioneer. What was interesting about it was that music generally did not need any accompaniment, generally for the average voice, if you'll excuse me. And it was also easy to sing and generally had words that had meanings to people. He was very clever with that. So, having talked about that, let me play a couple of Stephen Foster tunes for you that would have been around during Grant's lifetime. The first one you're probably very familiar with, Oh Susanna. Oh Susanna is one of the ones that had his copyright pirated. 1849, Grant was in Fort Wayne, Detroit at this point, and also it became sort of a rallying cry for the 49ers, the folks that went out west seeking gold and fortune and stuff from mining out in the western part. It was a very popular minstrel tune, and it established Foster. It's said to be the best known song around the world, the most easily recognized song worldwide. First performed in September 11th, 1847 at Andrew's Eagle Ice Cream Saloon in Pittsburgh. And I was right, he did sell this for $5, the rights to the song. So here we go, Oh Susanna. Okay, moving along here with some of the Foster tunes. I'd like to play for you a song called Old Folks at Home, but it went by another title that we're probably more familiar with, and that was Close But No Cigar, Swanee River. Okay, now Swanee River has sort of one of these interesting, quirky little stories that anything with history does, okay? It didn't start out as Swanee River. It started out as the Petey River, okay? Didn't sound too good. Then it went to the Yazoo River. Huh? Real good marketability there. Anyway, they landed on Swanee River, which I believe in Georgia, and Stephen Forster never even frankly heard of or ever visited. But it turned out to be a good rhyming word, I suppose, and it sounded nice melodically. So I'm going to play this for you, all right? Whoop. Where am I going? The former Yazoo River.
They have a Stephen Foster museum.
Yes, do they in Yazoo?
They,
Wonderful.
Right there where the river is, even though he never left me. Further south of Manhattan.
That's wonderful. Aren't these stories,
Yeah, they do.
aren't these stories fabulous? I was reading about the song Camptown Races, and they said it was so popular, there was a city in New Jersey called Camptown, and they changed the name to Irvington. Because they were getting too many people coming through. All right, anyway. Enough fun? All right. Now we're going to go back to Stephen Forster. We're going to wind it up a little bit here with Stephen. I'm going to play a song here that I love, all right? You'll permit me that, please. I remember my mother singing this to me when I was supposed to be taking naps in the afternoon, I think, if I recall. But anyway, it's an old song. It's an old minstrel song from Forster. Used a great deal of the Negro dialect with it, but the story is it's called Old Black Joe. Now, the story with this is Old Black Joe was actually a servant for Jane McDowell's father in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who Forster was engaged to. But apparently, Jane McDowell in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania was a very popular girl. So there were a lot of suitors that came around. Anyway, Old Black Joe, who was the father's chauffeur in the daytime and he was the doorman in the evening, he remembered Forster. Forster was always nice to him. And Forster promised him that he would write a song about him. So this is his story with this. Well, Old Black Joe leads me very cleverly into the Civil War era. Frankly, it's hard to discuss the Civil War and its causes to ignore the fact of slavery. It was probably the contributing fact to the war, mingled with a myriad of things. So with that, I'd like to move into the next major time period of Grant, of course, General Grant. Going in as a colonel at the beginning of the war, recommissioned with the Army, rising to general very quickly, coming to the attention of Lincoln very favorably, thus ending the American Civil War and slavery in the United States in 1865. The Civil War period was 4 years in our country's history, but it is enormous, an enormous 4 years. Music was a very, very big part of the Civil War and part of our society. Songs, they were prolific songwriters, hundreds and hundreds of songs in the North and the South, lots and lots of music for patriotism, for to instill courage and pride in the men who were fighting these fierce, bloody battles. Very, very popular part of music in the 1860s. There were also regimental music with many of the military bands. One of the uses of music in the Civil War was to place the regimental bands or whatever was available after a battle between the field hospitals and the men in bivouac. It was intended to filter out and buffer out the screams and shrieks of horror as the men were dying in those hospitals. So music served a great many, many functions. The North had a lot of their own songs. Of course, when the South seceded, the North still remained as the North. So we had songs such as, they created some new ones for the war, of course. Marching Through Georgia, celebrating Sherman, The Girl I Left Behind Me, The Battle Cry of Freedom, John Brown's Body. One of the big ones, though, was one I'd like to share with you, is Lincoln and Liberty. Lincoln and Liberty was a song, of course, celebrating Abraham Lincoln, now our 16th president. And this song was his election and campaign song in 1860. It comes from an old English folk song called Old Rosin the Bow. Let me play a short one for you here. Popular for politicians for a long time, because for you history folks here, William Henry Harrison used that as his song in 1840, different words. James Polk used it in 1844, and also Benjamin Harrison used it in 1888. So certainly a part of our American culture. The Confederate States, of course, had their own music. A lot of times they took the traditional Northern American songs and took the melody and added different words and changed the title and whatnot. But be that as it may, some of the famous Confederate songs that were very, very popular were the Yellow Rose of Texas, Bonnie Blue Flag, Goober Peas, which are peanuts, right? Lorena, beautiful, beautiful melody, and Maryland, My Maryland. I think perhaps, though, there's one particular Confederate song that stands out as the anthem of the Confederacy, and that, of course, is Dixie. Dixie was written by Daniel Decatur Emmett in 1859 through that time period, and at that time Grant was now in Galena, Illinois. He was he He was having left the army, not doing well, faring as a farmer and other efforts. Went to his father, who is now relocated in Galena, Illinois, and asked for work. So Grant is now 1859 in Galena, when this song by Daniel Decatur Emmett, which turned out to be the Confederate anthem, was showcased in New York City. Okay? And also the song that Lincoln recommended to be played after the Union troops invaded Richmond. I'd like to take a little bit of liberty with this, if I may, and give you a little bit of an interpretive piece, if I may, about my feelings about the Confederacy, sort of the rise and fall. Let's see how it goes. Other songs of the Civil War were interesting, and then we'll move along, there was a great song, I'm not going to be doing it today, maybe some other day. It's called Wait for the Wagon. It was a wonderful tune about rounding up the young people and bringing them like a Friday, Saturday to some common gathering place, a barn maybe or something, for dancing, socializing, probably courting, and who knows what else went on with that. Okay? I'm certain nothing in the 1800s. But anyway, what happened was that was a great song where the North took the melody, turned it into their own words, and they called it the Old Union Wagon. And the Southerns took the melody, turned it to their own word, and they called it the Southern Wagon. So that was pretty fun. One last point I'd like to leave you with this is there was a wonderful song during the American Civil War called Oral Lee. Maybe some of us are familiar with it. That song was resurrected in 1957 by Elvis Presley. So yeah, what a tribute to the melody, and of course that came out as Love Me Tender. Okay, one last thing here before I move along a little bit more here, is there was a wonderful story, one of the battles, one of the small, I hate to say smaller because, you know, when 25,000 men are killed, wounded, and injured. It's not small. There's nothing small about it. But on the scale of the Civil War, the Battle of Murfreesboro, Stones River, Tennessee, was fought in December 31st of 1862. It was a very interesting battle, something personally I've taken interest in, and I also do a lecture on that as well. So, what was interesting about that force is it was bitter, bitter cold that time in Tennessee, unusually bitter cold. We have these troops marching, they're ready to engage in battle the next night. They're no more than 100 yards away, 88,000 men facing each other, knowing that they're going to go into harm's way as soon as that sun comes up. Turns out, the regimental bands on one side of the battlefield, the Union bands started to play Yankee Doodle. A few minutes later, the Confederate band strikes up Dixie. A few minutes later, the Union band strikes up another Union song I've forgotten. And it just goes back and forth for a couple times. Ultimately, they stop and they play together this song. In case you've forgotten, some of the significant words in that tune was, "Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. Home, home, thank you, home, sweet home." One can only imagine what was going through those men's minds that night. All right. I didn't want to spend too much time in the Civil War period, but it's kind of hard not to. It's such a large portion of the general's life and of our country. So let me wrap it up, if I may, with a song that I think sums up the whole Civil War, especially the sentiments and the emotions on both sides. The northern states and the southern states having the same desires. Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. We'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer and the boys will shout. Ladies, they will all turn out and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. church bell will peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah, to welcome home our darling boy, hurrah, hurrah. All the lads and lasses say they'll threw flowers along his way, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny goes marching home. Okay. Nice. Okay, we're doing good. All right, we're moving along. Next song I'd like to play for you was another one of my favorites from a long time ago. Maybe again some of you good people will recognize it. It was written in 1875. Of course, this was during Grant's second term of his second administration of his presidency. One of the primary things that occurred in that year was Grant renewing the gold standard. It's a little complicated. I don't really understand a lot of it. I'm not trying to pretend that. But very complicated financial moving that really put the United States in the position that it was and was to be in the future. It re-established the gold standard and basically established the Republican Party as the folks who have the financial interests in monetary arrangements and other aspects for our nation. So let's do this. This is a good. I like this song. It goes on and on and on. I'm going to go on and on with it, but it's called Grandfather's Clock. Maybe some of you remember it. And it's a wonderful story about like this metaphor where this man is talking about this clock, and he's using this metaphor where it's the perfect employee. Couldn't have a better employee. So it goes on and on and on. But I'd like to do a couple of the verses, if I may, please. Excuse me. Okay, let's give it a shot. Oh, and there's a great part in here where it goes tick tock, tick tock. So if anyone is so inclined, has a burning desire, you can either say tick tock or whatever you want to do. I don't know. Okay, so let's go. Grandfather's clock was too large for the shelf, so it stood 90 years on the floor. It was taller by half than the old man himself, though it weighed not a pennyweight more. It was bought on the morn of the day that he was born, and was always his treasure and pride. But it stopped short, never to go again when the old man died. 90 years without slumbering, his life's seconds numbering. It stopped short, never to go again when the old man died. that of those he could hire, not a servant so faithful he found. For it wasted no time, had but one desire, at the close of each week to be wound. And it kept in its place, not a frown upon its face, and its hands never hung by its side. But it stopped short, never to go again, when the old man died. 19 years without slumbering, his life's seconds numbering. It shrunk, never to go again, when the old man died. I'm in grade school. But that goes back to 1875, that song. Okay, moving ahead. Serious stuff. I think if we're here, no, we're not if we're here, we're here. As we're here, that's what I wanted to say. It's certainly important to remember why we're here. To see me. No. We're here to sort of respect General Grant. The man spent 6 weeks of his life, his last 6 weeks of his life here. He died in this building on July 23rd, 128 years ago, pretty close to the date. He died in this room, right in the other side of the wall that these folks are in the back are sitting there. I'd like to play a song that was, let's say,
It's like Mama Charlotte, outside of Charlotte.
She'll be just you don't know about this.
No, I think that's
Well, except it's been noticed that they painted over the walls and the didn't straighten up.
This is their backyard.
The other guy that's
wondering what he should do. What do you think, Warren?
he had some answers there for 2 years.
They're,
Look at the Civil War agenda.
No, Frank. F-R-A-C-K. No,
Yeah.
A resurrection.
Making an alley, making an alley.
How you doing? Looking good?
This friend of ours, is in the Lincoln Society. The presentation. They go to a regional meeting. Continue to dig and interpret.